This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, Show 15. It's so dark right now.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Machaba. Ramsey wakes up at 4:30 in the morning each day to work while the rest of us are sleeping.
Hello, SE Nation, and welcome to another interview with a special guest. I'm happy that you guys are here and choosing to spend your time with me. I know it's difficult when it comes to time. Time is precious, and there's barely any. So thank you for being here. This is a bit of a longer show, so I'll keep it brief. Today's interview is with Andrew Tesla. So he is in a hybrid role where he does both the account manager position and the SE position in the power generation and manufacturing sector. He owns his own business, and so that's something we will discuss and how he got there. And one thing that Andrew brought today, among many others, was his passion. He really loves the position, and he wouldn't be doing that or having his own business as a SE hybrid if he didn't love it, and I know the feeling. Show notes are at wetheSalesEngineers.com /show 15. And without further ado, which I don't know how to write, let's get into the interview. Hey, Andrew, thank you for being here.
You're very welcome, Ramsey.
Thank you for being on the show. I appreciate you coming over and sharing your time. Maybe we can start off as usual by you introducing yourself to the listeners, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. If you haven't already introduced me, my name's Andrew Tesla. I'm an independent sales engineer or sales engineering consultant. What that basically means is that I take on the role of sales engineer, but I do it independently for a number of different companies. I guess you could say that it's an extension of a career in sales engineering. The only difference is that a few years back, I decided that I was comfortable enough to go on my own and provide these kinds of services to the market without having one employer, if you will. And that in itself provides a lot of opportunity to explore and to test out different ideas and work on different skill sets and strategies that you may not necessarily find or be free to do if you're working for a particular company that may have a certain corporate culture that they would want to follow. So that's basically what I do, and it's what I've been doing for the last few years now.
So just so I can understand this properly, you don't work for you have your own company.
Correct.
And
that's correct.
And you basically have companies hire you to be their SE for the day or week, or how does it work exactly?
Well, yeah. So it would definitely be more for. It would definitely be longer than a day or a week. Essentially, the companies that I work for are typically companies that do not have local resources or domestic resources. My two clients, the two main clients that I have right now are European clients, and they're multinationals. But in spite of being multinationals, they're not at a point in their business model, if you will, to open an office here in Canada. So what they've effectively done is they've outsourced the sales and marketing engineering process. And they've taken me on to do that. So I have a contract with them. Each contract is defined. Typically these contracts are defined as 1 year renewable contracts, but they can be shorter. By and large, the contracts are ongoing. Obviously, if things don't go well, they come to an earlier end. But generally speaking, when things go well or as things go well, you typically stay with your clients for as long as for as long as that arrangement works and that model works. At some point, they may choose to make a more material investment, and they may choose to open up a regional office. At which point, if you're in that position, you can become their sales director for that region, or you can just end the contract and go and seek out another client. In fact, that's actually what happened with one of my first clients. They decided after a couple of years of success to actually open up an office there too, and so the role expanded to include operations as well.
All right, and how does one get into that? Like, I've never heard of this before, so this is taking.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, consultants have been around for, since the dawn of business. Consultants have been around, or independent consultants, management consultants, I guess is something, a more contemporary term. But independent consultants have been around for a long time. They take on different roles. You have people from different demographic backgrounds and different professional backgrounds that provide, independent services to companies. It's not just lawyers and accountants or even engineering firms. There's many professionals from many different walks of life that provide independent counseling to companies that want a certain service. So recently, with the advent of certainly with the increase in globalization, which took place, it really started in the 1990s, but ever since 2000, with the advent of the internet and online marketing and sales and so forth, the reach of a company is much longer and much further away. So, there's a company in India that wants to sell engineering services or have a specific or unique or a niche product and wants to sell it in the United States. They can do so over the internet, and that works well at the retail level when you have a retail platform. But when you have a more sophisticated product that requires a slightly more complex story behind it, and the product itself, of course, falls into a higher budget range, then they need to attach arms and legs and a voice to those products, and they don't necessarily have the capacity, the understanding, the comfort level, or the budget to hire people and open offices regionally. So there has been sprouting up, or you'll find sprouting up. Certainly, you've found or you see outsourcing in many different areas of business. But a recent phenomena has been outsourcing your sales and your sales management. Some of the downstream or trickle down products and services you see are things like Salesforce and other CRM management tools to help a sales teams grow. So by extension, just basically reaching out a bit further, you also have professionals that'll say, well, look, I'll be your salesperson, your sales engineer, or I will basically provide you with sales services, whether it's an individual or a small team, and I'll do it on contract for you. And it can, it comes in many, just like anything, it comes in any shapes, forms, flavors, and colors. It can be one person that speaks to one company and represents their services, kind of like a manufacturer's representative, or it can actually be a team of people that are basically sourced out to a company to be their boots on the ground, if you will. It represents, as a business model, it represents much lower risk when you talk about business risk in the form of payroll, employment, and benefits. It represents substantially lower risk because as the company that is being outsourced does not have the same legal rights as an employee would. If you hire an employee, for every dollar that you, this is true in Canada. I'm not sure if this, what the exact ratio is in the States or other parts of the world. In fact, it's in other parts of the world, it's actually even worse. But if you hire an employee, you're looking, for every dollar that you pay that employee a salary, you have to add about 30% to cover the benefits, the taxes, and the employment contract termination fee if you want to fire that person, because you owe these people, at a minimum, you owe them vacation time. But in most cases, you owe them a settlement, depending on the nature of how they've been terminated. So if you can contract a company at a fixed price and say, I want you to work for, I want you to sell our product for 6 months or 12 months, and then that's the end of the contract, then there's kind of like no mess, no smell. That's the end of the contract. Was the sales campaign successful? Very easily measured using whatever metrics you want. And it's kind of like a plug and play sort of just add water and stir sales force that represents lower risk. The cost initially, the cost over the long term to outsource your sales, depending on how you measure it, it could be more expensive. But again, when you have a reduced risk and you don't know whether or not your product or service is going to fly, and you don't know whether or not you actually want to enter a territory, it's a better short-term alternative because you can walk away without any loose ends. Over the long term, if your outsourced sales company is doing a great job and you're making money hand over fist, then clearly at some point it's kind of like, okay, well, we're going to have we're going to open an office in that region because clearly our product is doing well in that particular market segment. You guys are doing a good job. Thank you very much. That's it. That's all. We're going to open up an office there, and we're just going to continue the work that you started. In today's marketplace, where you've got really multifaceted geography, reach, sectors, participants, and so forth, not to mention language, culture, and a myriad of aspects, companies want to have. Many companies want to have that kind of flexibility when they bring their product to marketplace. I happen to be in the technology sector, but I suspect it's equally true in many other sectors. There's a price point at which it becomes profitable, or interesting from that point of view. Again, if you're selling retail over the internet, then you may not necessarily need that. But if your product or service is complex enough and expensive enough that you need to attach a voice to deliver the story of that product, and you have the budget for the travel and so forth, then it makes sense to outsource before you make a full investment into a sales team.
Okay, so just so I understand this, from what I'm hearing, it sounds a lot like a sales channel to me. Is it similar to a sales channel?
Well, yeah. Formally, sales channels, though, if I go back to university and I think about how sales channels are defined, I believe that you define a sales channel as the avenue, the conduit that your product will take before it gets to market. So a sales channel might, like the internet, might be a sales channel because Facebook might be a sales channel.
Yeah, what I meant is sales channel partners or a reseller, basically.
Yeah. So resellers, yeah. So and here's where we get into a somewhat more formal arrangement. When you have, for example, Bell Canada has enterprise solutions that they dedicate a sales force to, but because the telecom industry is so sophisticated and so complex, they have in selling at the retail level, there's a number of channels that they have to actually go through to get their products and services on the street. And so they may go through licensed resellers, that would be one avenue, and they may go through other channel partners. And that is definitely one form of sales that speaks to large scale products and services, typically that hit the retail sector. That is not necessarily so efficient when it comes to engineering services or certain segments in the engineering community. My particular specialty is equipment that goes into power plants. So at a power plant, you will find a transformer, you will find switchgear, you will find gas turbines, you'll find 2-pole generators, 4-pole generators, you'll find no less than 10,000 different products that come together to allow that power plant to function properly. Those products they're certainly not typically found over the counter, although a lot of power plant managers might zip over to Home Depot to buy some electrical tape to fix a certain problem. By and large, that would be, the equipment that goes in there is called CapEx, or capital expenditures, capital equipment investment, and it's expensive equipment, which is not sold in high volume. So the way it's not a product that is going to be handled by somebody over the counter. It's a product that needs to have a specification written against it. It needs to have a sales engineer who understands the vernacular and the language that is associated with that particular facet of engineering, and it needs to have a negotiated contract. So it's a long-term sale, and it's with a sophisticated or complex negotiation. So that would never work with enterprise-wide sales. And that's why they need, and that's where the sales engineer, the essence of the sales engineer comes into place, because a sales engineer, by definition, then is an engineer or a technician or a technical person that has a certain understanding of a certain science or technology. In my case, it's with power plants. I know generators very, very well, and can describe how that product satisfies a specification which comes out, or which is typically published by a large utility. And so it's a salesperson, because you're still acting in a sales role. You're still selling a generator, but it's also excuse me, as my headset is just slipped off there. It's also it's also an engineer who understands how the product works and how it meets the specification of the details of the specification. So sales engineer is essentially, the two words that describe the process, or engineering sales. You can put it that way as well.
Right. So just so I can understand what you do better, are you doing the closing? Are you doing the negotiation? Or are you just focusing on the technical aspect?
Everything, the whole gambit, the whole sales cycle. So in fact, it goes beyond that, right? So with one of the companies that I represent, they manufacture propulsion motors for submarines. So my job is going to be to, number one, is to identify decision makers in the department for this particular company, in the Department of Defense. Okay, and that is there's only two that that we can possibly talk to. One is the U.S. and one is Canada. Obviously, find out who the key decision makers are there, and then who where the proposals are generated, and then where the public tenders are published. So my job is at the front end is to understand where those opportunities are open for solicitation. That's number one before anything is happening. So once we identify an opportunity, and one just came out just the other day, as a matter of fact, and it's a public tender, and it's available to anybody who wants to participate. My job then is to take that tender, or that request for bid, if you will, and then take it to my client, the people who have hired me, and then ask them, do you guys want to participate in this bid or not? And if they do, help them put together a response to the bid. And here's where some of the skill set comes in: understanding what the laws are in Canada, understanding the shipping terms and conditions, understanding what guarantees are expected, understanding the foreign currency risk. I mean, there's really a litany of specific concerns that are important to understand. That's value that you bring to your client when you understand those things. You may not know it coming straight out of school, but after you've done it for 25 years, you know all of these different facets of that are important to negotiate, or at least to understand, if not to negotiate. So you help them submit the bid. You compete. You submit your bid, and if you're lucky, you win the bid for your client. The client wins the contract, and at that point, you can help them close the contract. You can help them understand the delivery requirements. You can help them negotiate and project manage the delivery of the scope. Or you can just, if it's a big enough company, and particularly in this particular case, the propulsion motor for submarine company, the company's big enough that once the purchase order comes in, it's you just hand it over, and they take it over from there. Having said that, there's ongoing business development to do even afterwards, because there's many downstream or trickle down projects that can come up. For example, servicing the equipment, long-term service contracts, LTSAs, and things like that. So you're constantly in that sales process, basically speaking with people, understanding what needs need to be filled, and whether or not you can fill them. So again, it's the beginning and the end of the sales cycle. With big companies, you can, it's a little bit shorter because you can kind of hand it off to them. But so is the reality is that you almost have to do everything. You almost have to be a project manager as well. You have to help them with every curve and every turn that these contracts take, right up to making sure that the client is satisfied and happy. And ultimately, what happens is clients do not like to make international phone calls. It's hard enough for them to make phone calls between St. John's, Newfoundland, and Vancouver, but between Montreal and Berlin, or worse, the Middle East, Dubai, Kuala Lumpur, they just don't want to do that. If they have an issue, concern, or a problem, they're going to call the local guy or the local girl, and that's where you come into. You're basically the sort of the front man for the company if they have a problem, and that happens all the time, every day. That happens all the time, and you're sort of the bridge of communication, if you will, as well.
So just so the way you guys work, it seems, is very different than the way telecommunications or software works, where you have one guy who's the account manager, who's doing pretty much everything you talked about, from looking at these bids. He works obviously with the help of the SE, bids and understand the currency, and then closing. That's something that he would do. And then as the SE, I'm just the guy not just the guy, I am the guy who goes in and gathers all the requirements to allow him to build that proposal for the bid. So it's fairly different from. It's interesting to see that there are other people who do it quite differently from the way I'm used to. So I learned something new today.
I think I understand. If I come to understand the business that you're involved in, I mean, that makes sense. And I think that in your case, that you play a critical role in making sure that the scope of the product really fits what the client is looking for, and it seems to me that that's probably what you do, and it's probably what you're very, very good at. Compared to what I do, I'm not sure it's entirely different. I guess the difference is that it's where we add the word consultant in, and I guess I kind of loosely used that at the beginning of my independent sort of effort. When I went on my own, I threw the word consultant in because a sales engineer, I think, speaks to exactly what you just said. And I think that those are really critical roles in today's world, certainly in technical products and services. And so when I added the word consultant, because I found that the clients that I am working with, are definitely in need of the engineering savvy, if you will, somebody who understands how two-pole generators work and what they're, the sophisticated and complex mechanisms that are in play, so that warranties, guarantees, performance, capability curves, and other specifications can be understood and agreed to. But the consultant part, it's kind of like holding their hand a little bit, because since they don't have the sophisticated team that you might be involved with or work with, because you work with a company that is domestic as opposed to international, or you don't have, I'm not exactly sure the arrangement that you work with, but I'm pretty sure you've got a team of people that you work with. They don't have that. They don't have a team of people going into doing these to these sales and so forth. They just have the one guy, the one arm or the one hand reaching out there trying to close the deal. They have all the engineering back home, but they don't have anybody on the ground in Canada. One of the companies I work for, another company I work for in the UK, has an incredibly complex engineering platform to provide all sorts of models and solutions to engineering problems. But it's back in the UK, and everything is back there. So all the data has to be collected and sent back there. Sometimes my job is in data collection, in providing that information. But in my case, the technical response is there, but it's not. It would be at the same level as the consulting response, the management response, and that is understanding the scope beyond the technical specification, and that would be the delivery requirements, the legal requirements, the shipping and Incoterms, those requirements, establishing a rapport that speaks to long-term support, because a lot of these companies, they sell multi-million-dollar products, but if the product goes up, if it goes, belly up, who do they call? It's a company in Europe, so they may have real apprehension to deal with international companies. So as the sales engineer in this case, you help develop a rapport that puts the purchasers at ease and saying, well, look, yes, it's a European company, but don't worry, they've got a 24-hour hotline and you can still reach them, and we can have an engineer on site within 24 hours, that kind of thing. It doesn't always work. In fact, it's one of the big challenges it's one of the big challenges that this model actually faces, is that you face very, very stiff headwinds when you're competing against local companies who have people just down the road. But that would be true for any business. So, I'm not sure that it's entirely different. I'm not sure what we do is entirely different. What I would suggest is that the number of different, the spectrum of tasks that I'm involved in might be broader, and the depth might be a little bit thinner, or a little bit shallower, if you will. And I guess that's probably what it speaks to a little bit, because I find myself doing a host of things sometimes that I never thought that I would have to do. I think I remember on one delivery, it was for a utility in Newfoundland, and it was a real crisis, because the utility went. The power plant suffered a failure at the worst time of the winter, and in Newfoundland, electricity power production was certainly critical to the infrastructure, because at that time there wasn't a DC link to the mainland, and there was no secondary, there was no grid that they could depend on to purchase power. So they were facing some serious rolling blackouts, and I found myself driving to the airport, taking delivery of an international of a bearing for a coupling between a gas turbine and a generator, and the coupling's like 350 pounds, and so I had to have I was there at the airport taking the international delivery, and I had the forklift driver put it in the back of my car, and I drove it like 200 kilometers to a machine shop where it had to be had to have some modifications done to it, and then back to another delivery service who drove it across ground. So you find yourself sometimes in certainly interesting circumstances, basically helping in many different ways these projects, helping them execute these projects, doing a multitude of different things, because again, they don't have the resources in the country. They're depending on the one person or the few people that they've outsourced the engineering sales to. So that would be the only difference, I think, between what you do and I do, is that I might get involved in slightly more colorful tasks, if you will, to get the job done.
Well, all right, I've never had to go to the airport and take a shipment and put it in my car and take it to a machine shop. But what I believe the difference is that your job encompasses my job and the what would be my sales guy's job in one shot. So you're doing two jobs in one, which is interesting. But also, the way I feel about my job is to get stuff done. So if I have to go to the airport to pick up something, take it to a machine shop and get it fixed, then that's part of my job description, really. It's, in the end, I have to make the sale. I have to make the customer happy. So I guess we're pretty much doing the same thing, just a little bit differently.
I agree. And I think that what you've said is a very important trait that all engineers have to get the job done. I agree with you entirely. I think the perception too, and this I don't know if this is true of maybe younger professionals coming out of university and what they may think or the predispositions that they may have regarding their role if they do become sales engineers. But I think the one thing, regardless of what kind of a sales engineer that you are, I think the one most important trait that you can have is what do I need to do to get this project executed, to get that job done? And of course, often comes up, and what am I willing to do to get the job done, to make the sale? And what am I not willing to do, or what should I be doing, or what shouldn't I be doing? But from that speaks to the ethical conduct. But in terms of the commitment to the role, what am I willing to do? How far out of my comfort zone am I willing to step to get this job done? And I think that it's something that speaks to certainly to all sales professionals, and definitely to the role that you and I take on in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think you know what, we might be going into a philosophical area here, but I think it's also important to figure out why you want to do what you're trying to do. If you're like, if you don't have a why, you probably won't do any of the things that you need to do to get the job done. Like, but if you have an important why, like, hey, I need to put food on the table, or I really enjoy this, then you will figure out a way to get things done. As long as you figure out your why.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't think that's too. I don't think it's too philosophical. I think that you know, it's actually not philosophical at all. I just came back from Europe, and just as an anecdote of the job, I spent a week. I spent a week in Europe with my clients, and it was a great week. We had some people from South America with us. We were looking to develop partnerships in Latin America, and we had a great week together. And the meetings came to an end, and I started heading back here to Montreal. And if you've ever flown overseas, you know that you got to take a red-eye flight, and if you haven't rented a car, you've got to take trains everywhere. And that was me. I didn't rent a car in this case. I was taking trains everywhere, and I was jet lagged, and it was a very busy week, and I didn't get any sleep, and I really enjoyed it. But on my way back, I was exhausted. I was just wrecked. I was totally exhausted, and at some point, I was on some train headed to Gatwick Airport, and the train was jammed with people, and my back was sore, and I was, lugging my suitcase on and off the platform, and that exact question comes up. Why am I doing this? Why? There's got to be an easier way to earn living, and an easier way to earn an income. And so the question is not philosophical. Actually, the question is quite real, and it comes up time and time again when you're under stress. Or when things just go sideways, which invariably they will. I mean, because we live in a chaotic world. Nothing, it's not like there's laminar flow everywhere, right? Stuff happens, to put it nicely. Okay. So when you're under those kinds of psychological and physical stresses, I don't know about you, but I certainly ask myself, oh gosh, wouldn't it be nice to just sort of retire and open up a pet store or something like that? But I don't think that you can get away from it, and I think there's a lot to be said for for doing what you love to do. But what you love to do is not always evident, and that's when the question comes up: why am I doing this? But very quickly, I got onto the airplane. It was a nice 8-hour flight back home. I settled in my seat. I read a book, watched a couple of movies, and I was totally relaxed and very, very pleased with the overall turnout. There was a couple of physically stressful moments, maybe, but in general, I wouldn't want to have been anywhere else. And I think it's human nature to feel that way. It's certainly not. One blessing after the next. We're challenged, and it makes us stronger, of course, and allows us to develop, of course, in our profession.
Well, I'm glad that you're home safely. And I believe your why is that because you love it, because the next day you pretty much messaged me and you wanted to do this podcast. So I
Yeah,
appreciate
we've
that.
been trying to do this for a little while, so I was really I found it really really compelling, and as I've said, I think that you're doing a great service because just as we've discussed here, the role of the sales engineer is certainly it's certainly a growing role. And as more and more engineers come out of school and look for different kinds of opportunities, and as the world evolves, and in spite of the geopolitics that you see coming across CNN these days, it will become a more international world more and more, and the role of the sales engineer will become more and more sophisticated, more and more complex. And I think that there'll be a growing demand for that for younger people that want to get into the industry. I couldn't I couldn't speak more strongly about how rewarding it can be, how much fun it can be, and just depending on the kind of opportunity that you get, the kinds of experiences that you get, even if you're just doing it domestically, but if you're doing it internationally, it's just a lot of fun working with similar-minded people in different circumstances, speaking about technical things. I've never sold non-technical things in my life. Actually, it's not true. When I was 15, I sold ski equipment at a ski shop. So maybe I started my career really, really early. But generally speaking, it's a terrific profession to get into. A lot of fun and extremely rewarding. Extremely rewarding. I would highly encourage people to investigate. And what you're doing with this podcast definitely speaks to that. I think you're doing a great service, and you should certainly keep it up and continue speaking with other professionals that have other viewpoints and bring other ideas to the stage.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And yeah, I have a big why for doing this. Well, other than because it's fun. But yeah, so you just mentioned that the world's getting global, and you also talked about how you have to handhold your customers to do some certain stuff, and that's common with a lot of customers. Some customers are more technical than others. So how do you take a technical thing and just say it in a way that the customer understands? Like, how do you communicate that?
How do you communicate technical concepts?
Yes.
That's a good question. I think what you have to do is you have to read your audience, or you have to know your audience. From time to time, I will sit down with the purchasing department or the contract department, and clearly that's the wrong place to try and explain to them technically what the issue is technically, for example. But it goes further than that. There's an area called compliance now, which is very, very important certainly when it comes to utilities. And that you have to be part of certain accredited associations, and you have to meet certain accreditations before you're even allowed to bid on some of these projects. And so you have to, you're talking with different people. So the first thing to understand when you're trying to deliver an explanation or tell a story or provide a description is really understand who your audience is, and if that's a really good chunk of that challenge. Once you know who you're dealing with or you're speaking with, then you know where to start. It's very, very often when I'm in front of a crowd of people, I'll just take a very, very quick poll of who's in the audience. I'll say, well, how many engineers in the audience? And, you'll get so many hands raised in the air, and I'll say, well, how many purchasing managers or project managers in the audience? And you'll get maybe fewer. But if you take the time, whether it's with one person or a group of people, to understand who you're talking to, then it becomes immediately simpler in terms of understanding what the delivery has to be. If you're speaking with the other thing too is what's important too. If you're speaking with an engineer of a certain caliber that has specified a product and knows exactly what he wants, and you may not necessarily understand the product functionality, or sorry, not the product functionality, but the need, the complexity of the need as much as he does. To pretend that he knows, it's a mistake to pretend that that you know what he's talking about. You need to be upfront and say, look, I really don't understand I understand A, B, and C, but if you can explain B for me, that would be great. And they appreciate that, because that way they know there's not a lot of time being wasted or misunderstanding being done. But the delivery then it's purely an art form, and if you're talking about electrical engineering, you have to be comfortable. If you have an opportunity to work visually, that's always good. Whether you're trying to explain Fourier analysis visually is actually, oddly enough, it's actually a lot easier than trying to do it mathematically. Trying to understand mechanical tolerances visually, is certainly a lot easier than trying to explain them.
So as in a graph versus
absolutely.
a table.
Yeah, absolutely. Any illustration that you can provide really helps. I mean, graphs, obviously, XY graphs are always great in terms of understanding processes or changes over time. But a lot of the explanations just require a basic two-dimensional sketch. I was trying to explain a certain profile of a what's called a retaining ring. It's at a 4-pole generator, and the profile, the sort of the, I guess you'd probably call it an isometric drawing, but basically it was a profile, a relatively complex profile of a machined pattern, and there's just no way I could have done it explaining it to him in the English language. I had to pick out a piece of paper and show it to him on a graph, and then he understood right away what we were talking about and what the issue was or what the concern was. Other complex, which are less typical, if you want to explain, for example, delivery terms. I mean, delivery terms are very sophisticated. I think there's probably got to be at least 12 or 15 different terms now, but they all speak to who takes ownership and who takes risk during the course of the delivery, and how it changes when you go from the shore to the boat, and from the boat back to the shore again, and offloading and unloading and all that kind of stuff. That even is something that's more easily explainable with a picture, with a simple picture. Even if you're a terrible drawer, somebody who has absolutely no idea on how to draw anything, the illustration is always really a great way, whether it's technical. And often, if it's commercial, illustrations are always the best way to go. If it becomes too technical and you've got to deliver a very complex idea or concept, you have to have that done ahead of time, whether it's a PowerPoint presentation or whether it's a set of photographs. You've got to be prepared for that, because you can't. It's pretty hard to ad-lib complicated processes. I mean, if you're really, really good and you've been selling the same thing forever, then it's certainly easier. But if you're new to the market and you're selling complex processes or sophisticated technology, you're going to have to be prepared ahead of time. You just got to keep the number of slides. You just got to keep your PowerPoint presentation to 10 slides or less. I don't know why people don't get that. To me, it's like a no-brainer. Like every time I sit down with another engineer or another salesperson or a marketing person or a manager, and I look at it, the first thing that I look at with their PowerPoint presentation is I look at the bottom left-hand corner and I see how many slides is this guy going to pitch to me. And I look at it, it's 43 slides, and I'm going, okay, I might as well get comfortable. I don't understand why people don't get that. Attention spans are limited. Even most intelligent human beings, we can't absorb everything you have to say for 3 hours. We need a break. It's a proven social sort of characteristic that people just will not pay attention to. After 10 slides, you've lost them. So always try and keep whatever presentation, picture, description you want to make, make sure that it's 10 slides or less. I think that's one of my golden rules.
So here's the thing about slides. Like, for some reason, everybody uses. It's not just salespeople. Like even internally at companies, if they wanted to announce a new product, it's set as slides. Everything is slides. And it's always more than. I've never seen a presentation that's less than 10 slides. Which drives me nuts. I hate using slides myself. I like using the whiteboard, and I'm a really bad drawer. But it's easy to draw a box because I'm in networking. It's boxes and circles, so it works out.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I would much prefer sitting in front of somebody who is standing in front of me and drawing out a network, whether in your case, I guess if it's a node or a network with a number of nodes or um, um, a complex web of connections and so forth, or you've got a topology which you want to describe when you've got three colored markers. I would much prefer sitting through that, and I would find it far more interesting and far more compelling to watch you draw that and explain it to me as it evolves than putting up a slide. I mean, when you put up a slide, I mean, maybe it's just me, but I just think that there's just so much more to the human element of actually, in real life depicting an idea or a concept or a process by visually doing it. I mean, I think that's a great idea, and I would certainly encourage you to keep on doing that. I think you'll keep people's attention far longer than if you just put slides up. A funny thing happened. It was earlier today. I was speaking with a company that's got a relatively new technology in the in the utility industry, and the technology is based around a very complex machine part which weighs about 35 pounds, and it's machined out of industrial stainless steel, and it's got some medical Teflon involved, and it's a complex part, and it's about the size of a bowling ball, and it weighs about 35 pounds. So he arrived at my office, and he gestured, shall we start the presentation? I go, yeah, and he goes, here it is, and he grabs this thing and he just puts it on the desk in front of me and doesn't say anything. And I mean, I was floored, because I mean, it just spoke to so many nuances of communication that I find fascinating. And that was, number one, is when he gave it to me, he was extremely confident about his product. I mean, I knew what he was coming with, but I had no idea that he was going to actually show up with the actual part. I thought it was going to be a PowerPoint presentation, and I went to all this trouble to set up the projector and all that. And he just shows up with his part and he just puts it in front of me on the desk, and he goes, "Here it is," and it was perfect, because I picked it up, I could touch it, I could feel it, I could look inside, and I, like 100 questions came out right away, and it was extremely engaging, and it was very, very compelling. And it's what I've done in the past from time to time, but not to that extent, and it really, really works. If you have a part that you're selling or a technology that you're selling, and people can actually get their hands on it, bring it to the sales meeting, bring it to the sales pitch, and let them touch it and feel it. You'll engage them. It's audience engagement. It's all about engagement. You'll engage them much more. And if you force them to sit down through a series of PowerPoint slides.
Yeah, and you're right. It is engaging. It is more interactive. And what I like to do is, when I'm drawing something, that's a perfect time to give the pen to the customer and ask him to help me build what he sees. Right, and then we can modify that. And active participation from the customer means nobody's bored, and they're participating in building their own solution using our stuff. So,
right. That's a great idea. That's a great idea, because you're engaging the client. You're doing many, many things there. You're engaging the client about your product and services, but what you're doing is you're getting buy-in from him, right? He's going in there and he's helping you make the sale by completing the picture and telling you what he needs. You've got his buy-in, you've got a bit of commitment going on there. You've certainly got engagement. So, it's an excellent idea. That's a really, really good idea.
Yeah. No. Well, thank you. I didn't come up with it. I read it from some book somewhere, but I'll take credit. It's all good. So is there anything else about communication that you think we should focus on?
Well, certainly that's a long, we could talk for hours about communication. We could communicate for hours about communication.
Yeah, that's true.
I did put some ideas, down before we started, after we spoke last time. And I guess, without opening up another, like a 5-hour discussion around communication and so forth, to say that communication is important during the sales process, during this or the engineering sales process, of course, is the understatement of the year. I mean, clearly, communication is the only way to actually do our work. And some people are better communicators, and some people aren't so great. but there's really a broad range of styles. There's a broad range of tactics and strategies that people use. There's a broad range of philosophies that people use when it comes to communication. So it's pretty, it would be rather impossible to sort of encapsulate, what is the best way or how to communicate to be better at your job and so forth. But what I will say is one thing, which I think speaks to today's sort of marketplace that we're in right now. A lot of the stuff that you see coming on the news, when you hear people in positions say things and the believability of what people say. As a sales engineer, believability is just critical. I mean, if you don't have, if the person in front of you just doesn't believe you from the get-go, you're kind of dead on the water. Believability, credibility, credulity. I don't think I pronounced that right, but being credulous. I mean, all of the attributes of being someone of substance in the eyes of a client is just profoundly important. And sales engineers have a higher standard because they're talking about engineering itself comes with an ethical and a moral obligation to provide the best possible solution within the guidelines that you're given by the customer. But it's also important to be credible and to say what's true, what's right, and what's accurate. The thing about math is that you can't have an opinion about math. You can't have the opinion that 2 + 2 is not 4. You might have an opinion that it's only 3, but the reality is that 2 + 2 is equal to 4. So you've got to, when you get into very, very complicated processes and you're telling a client, the capability curve of this generator is such that it will operate at 65% lagging power factor without suffering end iron heating to any great extent. The engineer on the other, that you're selling to, he's going to have to make a choice. He's either going to have to believe what you're saying, or he's going to have to say, I don't believe this guy. I don't believe what he's saying. I know that he's reading from the specification, but I just don't believe that it's true because, in my experience, it's that there's always a problem at that point in the capability curve. You've got to be extremely, extremely aware of the accuracy and the credibility of what you say in a sales engineering role. Again, I don't want to demean any other sales role because you could be a shoe salesman. But the liability associated with selling the wrong pair of shoes to somebody is profoundly different than the liability associated with a 200 megawatt water-cooled stator generator that does not work or it will not work in the context that it was described. Not only do you have an obligation to represent its functionality, but you also have to think about other risks. This equipment is very, very dangerous. Something rotating, an 18-ton mass rotating at 3,600 RPM, flying apart can kill somebody in an instant. So you have a very, very high standard with which you are obligated to explain and discuss accuracies, and your capacity to be credible. It depends on your ability to communicate things accurately. And I think, when we talk about communication, that's I think I would probably start there more than anything. And that is, is what you're saying, is it true? Is it accurate? Is it consistent? And is it ethical and is it moral? So communication, very, very important. Start with being as accurate as possible. And if you can't be accurate, be honest and just tell the person, look, I don't know what the tolerance range of that material is, or I don't know what the outside diameter of that shoulder bore is, for example, or I don't know what the partial discharge Q capacity is. Just be honest. If you can't be accurate and specific, just be honest, and you'll be respected far more so than if you try and wing it.
Yeah, I always do that. I always add the statement afterwards, but I will find out, and people tend to like that. So
yeah. Agreed.
All right, awesome. So we're going to transition to the not so fire round. If you've heard this podcast before, you probably heard those questions. So
Yes, I did listen to them, so I'm ready. So go ahead.
okay, wow, all right, awesome. So I'm smiling right now because someone's heard my podcast. Other than a notebook and a pen, what is an essential tool that an SE should be using?
And who should be using?
A sales engineer, SE.
So the essential tool the sales engineer should be using?
Yep.
It's going to be his experience.
What if it's a brand new
When I say
SE?
experience, it's going to be his knowledge, all the knowledge that he learned at school, everything
Okay.
that he learned in school, everything that he learned in engineering school, plus the experience that he gains with every single sales call that he makes. Because you can't learn the sales process in a book. You can't learn it in a book. You can learn sales and marketing and the definition of sales and marketing in a book, but what's going to make him successful or her successful is everything that he or she learned in school, plus everything that person learns from every single sales pitch that they make. Put it in a journal, write it down. That's what you're going to depend on to be successful.
So yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question, but I'm happy you said it. Put it in a journal, write it down, because we all have experiences that we just forget about, and then never comes back. So yeah, and you're not the first person to say that. I think other people on the podcast shared your sentiment. So that's a very good tip. Is there a book or a resource that every sales engineer should read?
Yeah, gosh, that's an excellent question. And I know that there is, and I'm going to lose a point on this one because I do read all the time just by virtue of traveling, and some books are great and some books are not so great. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to find out. I'm going to give. Here it is. I know what the answer to that is, but I don't have it on hand at the moment. I will find out, and I'm going to get back to you. How's that?
Yeah, that's perfect. That
There's
works.
there's so many out there. Yeah.
I know, but no, I appreciate that. So
I'll tell you. Can I answer the opposite on what not to read?
yes.
Do not read any book that lists the possibility of success in a certain number of steps. So if you're going to the airport and you see a book, The 5 Rules to Success, right? Even if it's coming from an Ivy League university like Harvard, all right, that book is entertainment. It's not education. Buy it if you want to have fun and you want to enjoy it, but don't buy it because if you believe that it's going to make you a better salesperson.
Why is that?
Why?
Yeah.
The sales process is very much, and I'm talking about just the basic sales process. The people part of that is an art form, understanding what is important to say, when to say it, the pace and tempo of your dialogue, your pitch, the empathy or emotional quotient that you are experiencing or practicing at the moment. I mean, there's just so many factors that go into a successfully developed relationship that it is impossible to articulate the whole process in one book or in 5 easy steps. I'll give you an example. If you saw a book at the airport that said, learn how to be a piano virtuoso in 5 easy steps, and it was right beside a book that said, learn how to be a millionaire in 5 easy steps, which one are you going to gravitate to?
Oh, the millionaire sounds easier.
Right. The millionaire sounds easy because it is not the fact that we all like money and we all want more money. It's because being a millionaire in 5 easy steps actually sounds possible, whereas being a piano virtuoso in 5 easy steps, we all know, is ridiculously impossible. It takes a lifetime to become a piano virtuoso, and so nobody in their right mind is going to buy a book to be, that tells them how to be a piano, to be a concert pianist in 5 easy steps. You can't do it. It's an art form. You've got to practice. It takes decades. It takes a lifetime. Whereas many of us believe that we can be a millionaire in 5 easy steps. And the reality is that it's just as difficult to become a millionaire if you're coming from nothing as it is, it may be even more difficult as it is to become a concert pianist. So, that's really what my disdain for these books are. I don't think that they're bad books. I purchased them myself in the past, but the expectation has always been entertainment. It's not about seriously considering or thinking that you can become exceptionally accomplished in such a sophisticated social context by reading a book of 60 pages that outlines 5, 10, or even 50 steps. It just, reading books are important because it'll provide you with ideas and inspirations that you did not already have. But you can never, and I continue to read all the time. I continue to read I just finished reading a book about the truth and the how truth is being manipulated in today's social context. And I'm learning all the time, and it's important to learn all the time, and it's important to buy books all the time and so forth. I just think it's important to separate entertainment from education.
No, like all your points were valid points, and now I have to throw off like a few books from my bookshelf now. Thanks.
No, I keep them. They're fun to read. They're still, and there's also too there's morsels of information in there which are actually to say that they're not. I'm not saying that they're not true. I'm not saying that some of the things that they talk about aren't valid. What I'm saying is that the premise of the book, that you can actually become accomplished just from that book alone, I think it's wrong. I think it's a good idea. It's probably healthy to buy the books, but mix it in with other books.
I was joking. I don't actually have that many books that have, like, I have what is it, 50 rules for successful, or 7 habits of the highly effective people, books like that.
Good.
So
they're all good.
They're all good.
Only that, yeah.
And
the way go ahead.
The way I see it is that if you learn one thing from a book of 60 pages, then you learn something new, and it's not time wasted. There's better ways to use your time, but it's not really time wasted, especially if you're on a plane. And
absolutely, I totally agree.
All right. So you own your own business, correct?
Yes.
Right. So your time is probably really valuable, like everybody else's. How do you manage your time? Is there any tips or tricks to managing your time and task organization?
Yeah, and I've only recently learned this. I'm. You may not know by now, or you may have tried to guess as we've been talking, but I'm going to disclose it. I'm actually 57, right? And it's taken me 30 years to finally figure this out. And this actually this is consistent with reading books and learning, and time management is something that I'm interested in, and being productive. I've always been interested in that. And there's no one book that has provided the one answer. But what I found among the most important time management and productivity tools is the segregation of tasks, or the idea of segregating tasks. And we all have our to-do list, right? And anybody who has had a to-do list knows that invariably over days, weeks, and months, it grows ad infinitum, and it just continues to grow and grow and grow. And you never really whittle it down to zero. It's just a growing organic compilation of things that you want to get done. And some things take a higher priority, and other things take a lower priority. And so it's always moving around. And if I try to deal with them in a linear fashion, I always get discouraged and frustrated by the end of the day, because I never actually get the sequence of things done that I wanted to get done. And the reason is because I may have 5 things that I want to get done through the day, including going to the post office or going to the bank, right? But what happens is that there's a high likelihood that any one of those tasks will not happen because of some other distraction or obstruction. I can't get it done. Let's say, for example, I want to go to the bank midday, and my car breaks down or whatever. And what happens is it derails the rest of the day. And then, you kind of get lost, and then you lose your focus, and the whole time management process is gone. So what I have found is that I'm actually enjoying this recently, because I find that of the few things that I say, because I'm not someone who really subscribes to, this idea really, really works, stick to it, because most ideas sooner or later are flawed. But what I'm finding and I'm doing now is true that I am really busy. I'm not going to say busy. I'm going to say I'm very active because the sales process is taking initiative. So I find I'm very active. And what I do is instead of, I have obviously things that I have to do, and then there's things that I choose to do. I try to always have a mixed bag of things to do in the course of the day or the week. And I try not necessarily to establish a linear order for them. In fact, I create as chaotic an order as possible to get them done. And I make myself as flexible as possible to switch between tasks. And I always try and separate the tasks with a 10-minute downtime. Let's relax. Let's, read the newspaper or surf the internet, whatever. Just take a 10-minute downtime, a cappuccino break, whatever it is, and just wind right down. And literally get your brain to stop and then move to an entirely different task, which may be equally important, but on a totally different level. And then switch back and forth between these tasks that are not necessarily individually related. Then at the end of the week, the sense, whether I'm getting more done or not, I don't know, but certainly the sense of getting more done feels more real. And I'm pretty sure that I read about that. The importance of segregating your tasks and then switching between alternating between different tasks. It allows me to focus better because I'm after a while of working on one particular, if I'm working on a paper, for example, a lot of times I had a 1,500 word article that I had to do, and it had to be done by Friday, and it was like, and I to sit down and do the whole thing beginning to end was just not going to work. So I really parsed it out, and I said I'll do a paragraph between doing all these other things, and I'll do it at different times in the day, and that really made the job a lot easier, and I was a lot more productive in getting it done.
All right.
So that's what I would suggest.
So I just want to comment that I would never have guessed that you're 57 years old until you said read the newspaper.
There you go. So, and that's because you're in tune with your audience. You listen to what I said and you picked up on it and you said, hey, the next thing he's going to say is I'm going to watch cable TV.
Yeah. So, well, you don't look it. Let me put it to you this way. You don't look it.
All right on, thanks.
Is there an advice you would give a sales engineer that you feel they don't get from anybody else?
Wow, that's a great question. That's a terrific question. Oh my goodness! Wow, you really got me there.
Sorry.
That's a really, really well put question. I can see why you have a podcast is because you're delivering some really good inquiries here. And I would have to say, gosh, that speaks to so many different possibilities in terms of skill set, behavior, attitudes. I can only draw on my past experience. I had a really young engineer that was working for me who he was just not being told by anybody else that he had to, you can't believe it, he had to go back to night school and take a few courses on commerce and business law. And I guess what I'm saying is that he's such a good sales engineer that nobody had it in them to tell him. And this goes back when I was a regional director for a large multinational. He was such a good sales engineer that nobody was willing to tell him that he could possibly improve in certain areas because the metric was how much are you selling, and the kid was blowing out his quotas out of the water. So everybody was patting him on the back, and what I could see was somebody who was going to basically get burned out relatively quickly, and was not going to sustain the kind of growth that he was hoping to. Based on the fact that he was just basically depending on his natural skill set, and he was ignoring the need to develop, to develop other things that he was weak on. And I had to sit down with him, so in this case, the answer is I had to tell an engineer that there's some stuff that you need to learn, regardless of how successful and confident you are. there's some things that you need to learn. Whether you take the advice or not is up to you. And in this case, he kind of had to because he was reporting to me. I would be very comfortable telling engineers things that they may not hear from others.
That's like, if we equate it to sports, a lot of athletes are just naturally gifted, right?
Yeah.
And because they're naturally gifted, they stop working as hard as others who are not as naturally gifted, and then they get surpassed by those others who just work hard and try to improve themselves.
Correct.
So yeah, no, that's
correct. And you know what? If you bring up a very, very good point, you bring up a great point, because athletes that are naturally gifted. But let me say something. In sports, you have a fixed set of rules. Okay, whether you're playing basketball or tennis or golf, there is a set of rules that you have to follow, and then within those set of rules, there's a natural talent that speaks to athletic ability within a context or a construct of rules. The selling process has no rules, and it's infinitely complex because you're dealing with an infinite number of personalities, an infinite type of personalities, and there's no rules, right? And there's absolutely no rules. So the sophistication and complexity of the sale, I mean, we don't get paid, you and I don't get paid like an NBA star does, and that's for sure. And I'm not suggesting that it's harder to do what we do than what they do. But in terms of, from an engineering point of view, there's really very little definition around the kinds of rules, except for the law, of course, and business law. There's very little definition on how to do what you do. I mean, you have to do what you do based on it's very, very difficult for you and I to be successful because nobody's telling us what the rules are from moment to moment. We have to understand them as they come up.
And that's the purpose of this podcast, just to help people understand what the rules are, or at least give them an idea of what the rules should be.
Mm-hmm.
So that's great. That's awesome. I've taken a lot more than I expected of your time. I appreciate you spending it with me.
No, you're very welcome. It's a pleasure, and I will look forward to listening to your podcast and listening to your engagement of other professionals in the same area. And I have no doubt we'll have an opportunity to work together and again in a similar forum.
Yeah, it'll be my pleasure to work with you again, and we'll talk to you soon then.
All right. Okay, Ramsey. All right. You take care.
You too.
Okay.
Thank you, Andrew, for your time and passion. I really enjoyed talking to you. I'm glad that somebody else has that same passion that I have for the role, and I'm sure pretty much everybody listening would have that passion. Otherwise, why are they listening? So thank you for being here. I hope you guys found this interview useful, and I would love to hear from you about topics and questions you want covered in the future. After the interview, Andrew emailed me the book that he wanted to recommend, which is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. K-A-H, and not Kahneman, Kahneman. I'll have a link to it in the show notes. Again, WeTheSalesEngineers.com/show15. It is an affiliate link. I do get a 0.5% commission or something at no cost to you. If you do want to support the show, and you don't want to buy a book, you can go through the same link to Amazon and buy whatever you want within 24 hours. I get a small commission on everything you buy. So if you want to buy a car, do it off of Amazon through my link, please. Actually, don't do that. That's a stupid idea. Don't do that. All right, I'm done talking. So thank you guys again. And this is Ramsey signing off.